Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to this Summit of the Future Action Days side event, uh, integrating SDGs and delivering a sustainable future,
good afternoon,
2030 and beyond.
and welcome to this Summit of the Future Action Days side event, integrating SDGs and delivering a sustainable future,
good afternoon,
2030 and beyond. And welcome to this Summit of the Future Action Days side event.
Pardon me for that. We just needed to change a screen. Okay. I'm sorry, back now. This organization, pardon me, this webinar has been organized by Stakeholder Forum for a Sustainable Future in cooperation with the United Nations Environment Program in New York and co-sponsored by the Dominican Republic and Norway missions to the UN in New York and the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs. I'm Charles Newhen of Stakeholder Forum and your host today from New York. Those of you who are unfamiliar with the Stakeholder Forum, it is an international not-for-profit NGO that has, for more than 25 years, been working to advance sustainable development at all levels. Stakeholder Forum seeks to provide a bridge between those who have a stake in sustainable development and the international forums where decisions are made in their name. This Summit of the Future side event will, among other things, focus on the forging of integrated approaches that could help accelerate and sustain the environmental dimension of sustainable development in the remaining years to 2030. Today's event is underpinned by the Integrate SDGs initiative, a project of Stakeholder Forum supported by the UN Environment Program and the European Commission. It is designed to bring together, in partnership with major groups and other stakeholders, academics, policymakers, and practitioners across disciplines, sectors, and specialities to find and implement integrated approaches to accelerate SDG progress. As you can see on your screens, I'm joined today by several colleagues from Stakeholder Forum here in New York and virtually, and by a distinguished panel of guests. Now, for the sake of delivering as much meaningful content as possible in the time we have, we will introduce our speakers and panelists by name and affiliation as they take the floor, but not include the lengthy bios that we often have. There'll be a few comments about who they are by our moderator. Now, a bit of housekeeping. Before I begin, and hand things over to Stakeholder Forum Director Irena Zubcevic. Please note that the webinar is being live streamed on YouTube, and a link to the recording will be posted on the Integrate SDGs website soon afterwards. Anyone who joins us today will get that link, and those who were not able to join us but registered, over 600 people have registered, will get a link in 24 hours. Now, as you'll also see, attendee cameras and microphones are muted, and they'll remain so throughout the webinar. However, there will be an opportunity for questions from attendees after the intergenerational panel discussion. Those questions questions should be submitted to the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen, not the chat section. Now, after the intergenerational panel discussion, we'll draw attention to relevant questions in the Q&A section and activate that attendee's microphone so they can pose their question directly to the panel and interact a bit. Now, you're all also welcome to scroll through the questions. You should have access to that and vote up a question if you too would like to see it addressed. That'll help us select those questions that the panel can answer in the time that we have. Now, also, please note, you do see we do have the chat box. That's a place for you to communicate with each other, where you can post the links to relevant materials on the webinar topic and share your contact details with other attendees if you wish to. Now, let's get started with opening remarks from Irena Zubcevic, Director of Stakeholder Forum, followed by additional opening comments by the distinguished guests you'll see on your screen. Irena, you now have the floor.
Many thanks, Charles. Greetings to all, and many thanks for attending this side event as part of the Action Days for the Summit of the Future. I thank our co-sponsors, keynotes, panelists, and moderators. We will have a broad discussion on the integrating SDGs and delivering a sustainable future by 2030 and beyond, based on lessons learned in the implementation of the 2030 Agenda. As Charles has already said, this event is inspired by the Stakeholder Forum's most recent project, made possible by generous support by the European Commission and UNEP #IntegrateSDGs. This project is designed to bring together in partnership civil society stakeholders, academics, policymakers at all levels, and practitioners across disciplines, sectors, and specialities to find and implement integrated approaches to accelerate SDG progress, as we have seen that integration is one of the most difficult challenges in SDG implementation. To help us overcome this, we have established 3 communities of practice with a dedicated community of practice leaders for each one of them. And they are integrated actions to advance the SDGs, nature-based solutions to advance the SDGs, SDGs as framing for just transition strategies. They were launched at the side event we held during the high-level political forum on sustainable development this past July. The recording is on the website in case you are interested. All 3 communities of practice have a few common objectives that inform their modus operandi, such as sharing knowledge and good practices, exchanging ideas on integration, refining and applying tools designed to leverage integration, fostering collaboration and partnerships to advance integrated actions, and linking field experience and practice with effective policy integration. Interested individuals and organizations are invited to join a relevant community of practice and to contribute to its work through several channels. And here are some: joining and presenting an online knowledge and practice sharing webinars, co-developing a shared database of good practices, undertaking joint research, and developing and securing funding for collaborative projects designed around integrated SDG approaches. Charles will put in the chat a link to the dedicated web page where you have more information and you can sign to engage with one or all of the communities of practice. I thank you and wish you all interesting discussion. Back to you, Charles.
Thank you. Thank you, Irena. Thank you very much for setting the scene. Now, before we go any further, I would just like to thank, on behalf of the entire Integrate SDGs team, our next guests in advance for taking time out from their very full schedules to join us this early morning in New York. Our first additional welcome remarks will be by His Excellency Mr. Pavel Contreras. He is the Minister of Economy, Planning, and Development for the Dominican Republic. And our first distinguished guest, Minister, please activate your microphone and webcam. You have the floor.
Thank you, Charles. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. The government of the Dominican Republic is very pleased to co-sponsor, together with Norway, the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs, and the Stakeholder Forum, this important side event that seeks to think beyond 2030 and create more favorable conditions for the development agenda and well-being of future generations. 8 years after the launching of the 2030 agenda, we ask ourselves not only what we have achieved, what remains to be done, and why progress has been so slow, but especially what we could have done better, and what we can now do to accelerate the implementation of the SDGs. The general answer to the questions about the limited progress achieved has to do with at least 3 shortcomings, I should say: insufficient resources, insufficient knowledge, and insufficient collaboration and articulation within countries and at the international level to enhance learning and synergies. Also, these 3 dimensions are linked to each other. The issue that concerns us this morning is that of knowledge and the need to strengthen the agenda with a much more comprehensive and multidimensional perspective. In fact, perhaps the progress achieved is largely since we have made advancements in these regards. With less than half of the time planned from 2015 to 2030 remaining, we are forced to consider extending the deadline to give the global action a framework a broader time horizon. At the same time, we must incorporate new elements such as reduction of emissions, intergenerational solidarity, and the change in the demographic bonus, which in countries such as the Dominican Republic is expected to be exhausted by 2040. Both elements serve as a framework for us to consider reinforcing existing strategies that have been successful, as well as incorporating innovative strategies based on more integrated perspectives that exploit synergies between objectives and policies. Among the existing strategies that seems to have been successful, we can highlight communities of practice, a phenomenon as old as society itself. These are groups of people with a common interest who, by interacting, learn from each other and perfect their skills to promote individual and collective development. The challenge is to move towards experiences and proposals that allow us to strengthen synergies between governments, the private sector, NGOs, community organizations, and multilateral organizations to advance the 2030 Agenda and beyond. To do so, intergenerational solidarity is key. The government of the Dominican Republic hopes that this will be a fruitful session for exchanges and learning that, in addition to providing us with knowledge and experiences, will also give us energy and hope. Thank you.
Minister, thank you so much for that intervention. And in particular, it's actually quite helpful that you made comments on communities of practice, what they are, and what their benefits can be. So thank you very much for that. Now we'll move on to our next speaker. It is Meena Syed from the Permanent Mission of Norway to the United States. Ms. Syed, please activate your microphone and webcam. You now have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I hope you can hear me. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Meena Syed. I'm actually the Director of UN Policy at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Norway. And Norway is pleased to be able to co-sponsor this event today as well. I'm going to give some short remarks on this very important event that attempts to identify precisely the problem that we have, which is that only 17% of the Sustainable Development targets are proceeding as planned. Now, it's very easy to automatically assume that then there is something wrong with the agenda itself, since we've been failing so far. Some will say the agenda is too long, that it's too ambitious, whether it's too complicated or complex. Others will say that it doesn't have enough weight on human rights and governance, and quite a few may say that it doesn't rank the goals in a proper way, or that environment should encompass all other goals. And as we know, there have been always protests that it should be more human-centered, focused on socio-economic well-being of people, or even that questioning whether the 2030 agenda is primarily an agenda of the global north or of the global south. My point would be simply this: the 2030 agenda is the very best that we have got, and it is, per definition, balanced among many different views and perspectives. And it would not be correct strategically nor politically to revise or renegotiate that at any point of time. I remember very well in 2015, we miraculously managed to reach this compromise. And it was obviously it was a different time back then, but we managed. And I'm pleased and looking forward to listening to Ambassador Donahue speak later about this. And now our job at this moment is to find out how to deliver effectively, or as effectively as we can, on the 2030 agenda with SDGs before the end of 2030. It is true that this is a complex agenda with significant numbers of interlinkages. And I have nothing but great respect for those scientists and bureaucrats and consultants that constantly map out and measure the intersectoral progress, and making sure that we spend our money wisely, achieving multiple ends at the same time. Societies are complex by nature and should be treated as such for our planning. We fully support the notion that nature and climate-based solutions should always be part and parcel of how we think when implementing the agenda, and we need an intersectoral approach. But at the same time, an intersectoral approach is not rocket science. And an example from my own country, Norway, is that since the 1930s, Norway's had a sort of technocratic approach to development. And what we mean by that is that the government has been profiting from knowledge-based solutions at critical junctures where they have been deciding policies. That's part of sort of the social democratic DNA. Government is also largely responsive. We have institutionalized the bottom-up approach in both identifying problems as well as their solutions. We listen to communities as well as experts. And the government is also integrated using a sort of whole of government approach, even if we too are hampered by siloed decision-making progress and processes. We systematically take advice horizontally and vertically. And of course, we are not perfect, and not everything we do is sustainable. But our system is a testimony that there exist viable political tools to create complex and sound sustainable policies that work. And that leads me to my final point, which is that if we fail on the promise of the Sustainable Development Agenda, it is not the agenda that is the problem. Instead, it would be and is a political problem. It is an organizational problem, and it is a financial problem. So I very much look forward to listening to the discussion today, and I also look forward to the discussions that we will have towards the Financing for Development conference in Spain next year. And there we will have the possibility to change gears radically to scale up our contributions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Syed, for your intervention. We'll now move on to our next special guest, is Mr. Jamil Ahmad, the Director of the New York office of the United Nations Environment Program. Director Ahmad, please activate your microphone and webcam. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Charles. Distinguished guests, esteemed colleagues, and dear friends. As we gather today, we are at a pivotal moment in global cooperation. Tomorrow, all eyes will be set at the UN headquarters here in New York in anticipation of the adoption of the Pact for the Future at the Summit of the Future. This document will help us chart the path forward as we strive to meet the SDGs and safeguard the interests of future generations. During discussions over the past few months, governments have had to grapple with profound questions about equity, justice, and the transformative role of digital technologies, and consideration of new developments, including artificial intelligence. The stakes have never been higher, and the choices we make today will echo for generations to come. In this context, we are also looking ahead to a series of critical intergovernmental meetings that will shape our shared futures, including in the area beyond 2030. By the end of the year, we will have meetings on biodiversity, on climate and desertification. These moments are opportunities to reaffirm our collective commitment to the integrated nature of SDGs. As the previous speaker said, this is the best option in multilateral cooperation that we have had in recent years, building the frameworks that will guide us towards sustainable, equitable future. At COP16 of CBD, we must take forward the commitments under the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, including resource mobilization, operationalizing the benefit sharing mechanism for digital sequencing of genetic resources, and preparing the financial mechanisms to support this ambitious work. This will be central to the progress. At COP29 of climate change, the stage will be set for submission of enhanced NDCs by 2025. Climate finance remains a critical issue, and efforts toward a new, robust goal will succeed the $100 billion per year target. This is a time for leadership and the advancement of climate commitments and elevating the global momentum, including in the context of achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. At the UNCCD COP in Riyadh, the focus will be on land degradation neutrality by 2030. This is not just about restoring lands, it is about integrating the land agenda more fully into the work of the Rio Conventions, accelerating progress and ensuring that national development plans reflect our commitment to sustainable land management. Dear participants, meaningfully integrating the three dimensions of SDGs and delivering sustainable future beyond 2030 cannot happen without the engagement of all segments of society, particularly our youth. The message from the youth during the Action Day, which took place yesterday at the UN headquarters, was very clear. They are the architects of our sustainable future. Their energy, creativity, and the unique perspective are essential to the transformation we seek. The principle of the intergenerational equity must be at the heart of our actions. We must ensure that youth and other marginalized groups are not just heard, but empowered to lead and to act. Ladies and gentlemen, we stand at a crossroads. As we reflect on the SDGs and the short road to 2030, let us embrace the spirit of inclusivity, inclusive multilateralism, and cooperation. It is only by working together that we can overcome the immense intertwined challenges ahead. A sustainable future is within our reach, and with the vision and courage to act, we can ensure that future generations inherit a world that is just, resilient, and in harmony with nature. I thank you.
Director Ahmad, thank you so much for your insightful comments and for helping again to be setting the scene. And now we'll have our final welcoming remarks from our distinguished guest, Mr. Juwang Zhu, Director of the Division for Public Institutions and Digital Government. And many of you also likely know him as the Acting Director of UN DESA. Director Zhu, please activate your microphone and webcam. You have the floor.
Thank you, Charles. We have heard very insightful remarks from previous speakers. I agree with the views and the perspectives of the previous speakers. And I like in particular Meena's remarks that there's nothing wrong with the agenda, but we do have problems with the implementation process. So just in that spirit, let me add a few additional remarks. And before doing so, I want to thank the co-sponsors for organizing this forum, and DESA is part of the process, and we are very happy to co-sponsor this discussion. Over the years, as Charles, you said in your introductory remarks, that the Stakeholder Forum has played a critical role by providing an objective platform for discussing on issues that are critical to sustainable development. And that platform has allowed delegates in New York, NGOs and other stakeholders, and including the Secretariat staff, to have a candid discussion on issues that are being debated at the UN, but without the political sensitivity that are associated with the intergovernment process. And today, the Stakeholder Forum is fulfilling that critical role again, discussing the important issue of integrating SDGs and looking at it beyond 2030. And I want to say that this is also a very timely discussion. Discussion on the SDG beyond 2030 have been a little bit politically sensitive. It's not without controversy. There are those who are worried that any discussion on SDGs beyond 2030 would have a negative impact on its implementation, on the focus on implementation. And that is very much also the concern that has been guiding, among others, the work of the Secretariat. The Secretariat hasn't in any open official way engaged in discussions on this issue. However, with the Pact of the Future scheduled to be adopted by the General Assembly tomorrow, and with the mandating paragraph in the Pact of the Future that requests the high-level political forum to consider the implementation of SDGs beyond 2030, we are now almost mandated to begin this discussion. And I want to thank once again the Stakeholder Forum for its strategic foresight initiating this process. Just maybe adding a couple of points for to facilitate the discussions that will be following. One, our department DESA has been servicing an independent group of scientists who prepared the every 4 year the Global Sustainable Development Report, also known as GSDR. And some of the scientists have used their outside capacity to already initiate discussions on SDG beyond 2030, including publishing commentary in the journal Nature. One of the findings is that probably particularly in view of the discussion that Meena just facilitated in her opening remarks, that it is perhaps the most convenient and politically sound way to extend the 2030 agenda to 2050, but with interim timeline and goals for 2040. And this is one option that has been attracting a lot of attention. Again, I'm going to echo Meena's remarks quite a lot here. Another school of thoughts feel that the agenda is a very sound agenda. It's a wonderful framework that is the best we can have in guiding development. But perhaps more attention should be focused on the how to integrate the SDGs, the how to harness the linkages, which are among the fundamental characters of the 2030 agenda. Conceptually, that has been accepted by governments and stakeholders at large, but the how is very weak. So perhaps in advancing the implementation of the 2030 agenda and SDGs, not waiting for beyond 2030, but right now, we should already focus more on the operationalization of the interlinkages and the synergies, including by looking at the institutions, whether we should focus more on institutional reforms so that the institutional innovations can prepare governments and stakeholders for the implementation. And one last point, perhaps we should also strengthen monitoring for purpose of SDGs. Right now, our progress report, which is led by DESA, but with some 40 agencies' inputs, reflects only on progress. Should we go beyond that and providing monitoring for evaluation for purpose in order to identify what goes wrong and why it goes wrong? And Meena mentioned earlier on the focus on financing, which is why the Secretary General has launched the SDG stimulus package. But beyond the finance issue, it is perhaps also the moment to look at the voluntary national reviews process to see if the VNR process can also focus on the house. With that, I want to thank again the Stakeholders Forum for organizing this and looking forward to the discussion that follows. Thank you, Charles. Back to you.
Director Zhu, thank you so much for your high-level insights, information that most of us would not be privy to. So we do appreciate that, and thank you very much from the team at Stakeholder Forum for your praise about our organization. So From this point, let's move on to our two keynote addresses. First by Mr. David Donahue, a distinguished fellow at the Overseas Development Institute and former permanent representative from the Permanent Mission of Ireland to United Nations. He will be followed by Anita Danyo, who is the Asia Director for the ETC Group in the Philippines. And Ambassador Donahue, please activate your microphone and webcam. You have the floor.
Thank you, Charles. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you. We
Great.
can.
Okay, terrific. Well, it's a great pleasure to be here, and thank you for the invitation. I should explain that my role in 2015 was to be one of the two co-facilitators for the discussions, for the negotiations which led to the adoption of the 2030 agenda. And my companion was the ambassador of Kenya. So therefore, I have a particular personal investment, I suppose, in the SDGs, how they came about, and in the implementation of the SDGs and the 2030 agenda. I relate very much to some of the remarks made earlier, in particular by Meena and by the acting director. I think there is a danger of the world becoming a little bit prematurely depressed about the rate of progress we're making on the SDGs. The truth is that if you think about it, the pandemic was an enormous shock for the entire world. It knocked countries and economies out of kilter. It exposed severe weaknesses, notably in the health system, also in social protection and so on. So the pandemic really was something that we could not have anticipated. The repercussions of Russia's invasion of Ukraine have also been quite severe in terms of countries who are struggling to implement the SDGs. So those are just two big shocks that I would pick out straight away. And I think one must be realistic, therefore, that we were never going to be at the optimal state of implementation by now. I mean, 17%, of course, is very low, but you know, it's anybody's guess where we would otherwise have been by now. We certainly wouldn't have been at 100%. We might have been more at, let's say, 40 or 50% of implementation of the targets. But I'm not too depressed by the fact that we are at the 17%. I think what's more important is that ways of behaving, ways of operating within government are gradually changing. Now, I emphasize gradually. Meena made very good points about and indeed the acting director, about the difficulty of getting out of silos. All governments and indeed other stakeholders were going to struggle with the complexity of goals which are interconnected. To be absolutely honest, we were never going to achieve a truly transformative agenda or pursue a transformation without acting on the interactions between the various goals. Treating the goals separately was never going to deliver the really radical change that we need. We have to have all governments looking in a holistic way across the full range of the goals, seeing where there are opportunities to progress several goals simultaneously, but also watching out for dilemmas, for contradictions, for dangers, which could arise if actions taken in one area without reference to or sensitivity to what the impact might be in other areas. So it does require a deep change of attitude among policymakers, ministers in countries all around the world. So we were never going to change that overnight. I think that we are gradually making progress. May I say that the HLPF arrangements over the period since 2015 have steadily got better, and some of the people who were responsible for that are involved with the Stakeholder Forum. The voluntary national reviews, I think, are a good indication of the enthusiasm, and I really mean enthusiasm, which is still evident around the world for the SDGs. I believed, as did my Kenyan colleague, that we might get perhaps about 100 countries, if we were lucky, who would be willing to come and give a voluntary report on their performance. well, correct me if I'm wrong, but we have almost achieved all 193, not just once, but several times. There are some conspicuous omissions, but practically every country is enthusiastic about this agenda, and they wouldn't otherwise be devoting so much effort to producing their national reports every year as required. So I really do take comfort from the monitoring system we were able to set up. Now, having said that, I think that there is a lot of room for improvement. And in particular, I think that far more attention needs to be paid in the HLPF to this issue of synergies and trade-offs, to how we can implement the cross-cutting aspects of the agenda. That's where governments really need to learn from each other. And on the whole, there hasn't been quite the openness in the HLPF to discussing these cross-cutting or these integrated aspects. There has been more of an attention paid to what each country is doing in under individual goals. So there's room for improvement there. In the time remaining, can I emphasize or endorse what others have said about the importance of youth in the design of the agenda to begin with, and also in its implementation. And I really welcome what I hope will be the Declaration on Future Generations, which will come out of the Pact of the Summit of the Future. The young people in 2015 responded with enormous enthusiasm to this agenda, the SDGs, because they knew that it would be an agenda for them. It was for them that we were all doing this, in a sense. So it has taken a while for that principle of intergenerational equity to kind of come through more strongly, but it is, I think, at last there. My last point is really about the post-2030 agenda, if I can call it that. My own feeling, and I'll be quite blunt about it, is that the SDGs are here to stay. I believe that we will be adding to them in the next agenda, not subtracting from them. There are various things which we omitted in 2015, partly out of sheer omission, but partly because they weren't yet present as realities. One would be the potential of AI and new technologies, but there are many others that one could, development finance should have been emphasized more in the 2030 agenda, although of course we did have the Addis Ababa agreement in parallel. So overall, there are things I can see which should feature more strongly in the next agenda, but I'm pretty certain that the next agenda will be very similar to the present one. Why do I say that? Because no, there hasn't been any serious criticism of the actual goals and targets. Yes, they are ambitious. At the time, we all wanted to stretch ourselves. That was a universal view, and there was, in fact, a strong international atmosphere in favor of cooperation. And so, if you like, we hit the 2030 agenda at a very good time in international relations. Now it is clearly a darker period, but I'm still struck by the fact that the actual agenda has not been seriously criticized. Yes, parts of civil society will say there should be more on human rights. Another part might say there should be less on human rights. Some earlier speaker made the point that this is the best we were able to get to. It was what the market allowed in 2015. I am still confident that we would get to something fairly similar for the next negotiations, even though I recognize the risk that some countries will try to pull back on what we achieved. But I think overall there are enough countries who see that this is the way to go. We can improve on it here and there, but I don't see us subtracting from it. I let it go at that. I hope I haven't exceeded my time. Thank you, Charles.
Ambassador, not at all. It's ever so helpful to hear from you, having been part of developing the SDGs, on how you think we should move forward, and that's important to get your perspective there, and in particular for emphasizing how important it is for the youth of the world to have an equal say in how we go forward. Now let's move on to our second keynote address. Director Janyo, please activate your microphone, and you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you, Charles. Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you fine. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I'm Neth Danyo. I'm happy to be sharing this opportunity to deliver the keynote statement with Ambassador Donoghue. We remember you fondly from 2015 in the SDG negotiations together with your counterpart, Ambassador Kamau, at that time from Kenya. And as you recalled, like civil society in general, women, youth, environmental NGOs, farmers have actually actively participated and contributed to the negotiations at the time. It was very dynamic. It was very inclusive, very open, a lot of democracy in action. We've seen it, the negotiations in New York also provided inputs at the regional level and the national level. It's really sad to not see that at this point. In the lead up to the Summit of the Future and the Global Digital Compact, as we are discussing the House, no? As the previous welcome speakers who welcomed us mentioned that yes, the House in the SDGs may be weak, and I think the Summit of the Future and its twin, the Global Digital Compact, aim to address the how, and I think it would have contributed. Contributed a lot in the process and in reaching the content if we had that same dynamic, open, very active engagement of civil society that we had in 2015, as Ambassador Donahue would remember quite well. And as I said, I'm one of those members of civil society who has gone through the bungee ride, not the roller coaster of the SDGs, no, from since then unto where we are now, where the fate of the 2030 agenda, which is the what, is potentially, well, benefited, undermined, wherever you look at it, by the how, which is the Summit of the Future, the Pact of the Future that will come out at the end of this week or next week or tomorrow, and the Global Digital Compact, in an era where we have artificial intelligence, artificial general intelligence, machine learning, and a long march of techno solutions to structural problems. As this side event also aims to flag new and emerging issues and challenges that are not fully addressed in the SDGs that may need to be considered in any post-2030 sustainable development agenda, such as AI, and various new technologies that pose significant risk and may also offer benefits towards attaining the 2030 agenda, the SDGs in particular. I would like to zoom in on that. I also agree that the challenge before us is not about renegotiating the SDGs as we near 2030. That's too late for that. Even if we stretch it to 2050, like the goals are ambitious and rightfully so, because the situation we are in really requires a lot of ambition. So the challenge is actually more about ensuring that new technologies such as AI, machine learning, and all the upcoming new technologies in the horizon will not undermine this the aspiration towards reaching the 2030 agenda, towards attaining the goals, and will not reinforce growing inequalities, the growing deficit in democracy and human rights, which are continuously under global threat, the armed conflicts that persist and explode, and the fact that our planet is on the brink of irreversible damage. I think the challenge is to ensure that none of these techno solutions will aggravate that. In order to be supportive of the SDGs, the 2030 agenda in general, the Summit of the Future and the Global Digital Compact that will come out from all these negotiations that are ending in New York this week must actually go beyond addressing the digital divide, but address the underlying wealth divide, the development divide, the gender divide that characterize our world right now. As the world faces worsening multiple planetary crises, we believe that this is a critical time to assert the importance of rights-based multilateralism and global solidarity. As mentioned by Ambassador Donahue, an approach that will require a holistic means rather than the usual siloed approach is what we need in order to support a shared vision that must be based on the recognition of the multiple crises that we face and the unparalleled inequality in wealth and access to resources among and within countries, gender and racialized communities. I think these are the underlying problems that we need to address. That's why they cannot be addressed by siloed approaches. We need a shared vision that fully centers human rights, and we've emphasized that since 2015. We've not seen much development in that, even in the promotion of gender equality and defending democracy, decolonizing governance of such spaces such as the internet, and ensuring accountability, justice, and peace, no, while respecting planetary boundaries. We still have to see a lot of inroads in order to make sure that we go towards that direction that is set out in the 2030 agenda. I think these are central in global discussions, no, that we have right now. Also, I think when we look at unsiloed approach, more holistic approach, there needs to be a recognition that there are also massive environmental and climate footprints in the upcoming the upcoming new technologies, the current new technologies that are being promoted as the solution to the crisis that we're facing. You cannot ignore that the massive environmental and climate footprints of this technology in the midst, no, of the multiple crises that the planet is facing right now. No, in order for new technologies to support and enable the attainment of the SDGs, the urgency of democratic and participatory global assessment of these technologies needs to be emphasized, as well as looking into the impacts on society and various dimensions of our lives, including food systems and agriculture, livelihoods, and cultures. And that cannot be overemphasized. A global mechanism for societal evaluation of new technologies and horizon scanning that is anticipatory, inclusive, gender responsive, and takes into account the lived experiences of women and marginalized communities need to be put in place. We did raise this in 2015. Very little of that ended up in SDG 17. Some of these things come up during the reviews, but I think we have to really put these mechanisms in place, especially now, no, that while we are struggling to reach the 2030 agenda, here comes new technologies that are being presented to solve these problems, but are evidences that are showing that they're actually aggravating inequality, violence, discrimination, etc. So women, indigenous people, civil society, local communities, especially farmers and small-scale food producers that feed the world should be represented in the evaluation of the impacts of these new technologies based on the lived experiences and knowledge systems. And as mentioned by Ambassador Donahue and the speakers before him, like while we don't have, there's no need to renegotiate the SDGs, and we have to remain ambitious. We have to take into account that there are developments that were not there in 2015, that are here in our midst, that need to be taken account because they could potentially undermine. Well, we keep on saying that these new technologies could potentially benefit the attainment of the 2030 agenda. I think let's not close our eyes as well on how inequalities have worsened since 2015, how some aspects of the important aspects of poverty and disempowerment have actually become worse since 2015. And we have to look into how the new technologies and emerging technologies that are being presented now, as being discussed now in New York, could actually potentially undermine what we have gained and what we have to achieve down the road. So I would like to end this keynote with this note. So thank you again for the invitation. Thanks.
Director Danya, thank you so very much for that, and in particular for reminding us just how much has changed since 2015. There's a new generation of people in the world. There are many more who've come of age since 2015, and so many things that have happened, not just unimaginable developments like AI, but the severity of climate problems that we're seeing today, floods in Africa and Europe, fires in North America. Those are some things that we just didn't imagine as reality in 2015, and of course we need to address today. So thank you very much for that. Now let's quickly move on to the next section. And what I'm going to do is just quickly share the screen so that you can see who our who we're going to have contributions from in the next minutes that are coming along. I would certainly like to also introduce our moderator, David O'Connor. Dr. David O'Connor is a fellow of Stakeholder Forum and most recently the permanent observer at the United Nations of the International Union for Conservation of Nature, the IUCN. Previously, while at the UN, David led the United Nations team supporting the UN General Assembly Open Working Group that crafted the Sustainable Development Goals. David, you have the floor. Please activate your microphone.
Thank you, Charles. I think it is activated. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you fine. Thank you.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. We have a very, very interesting panel. I'd like to thank all of the previous speakers. I'd like to say hi to David Donahue in particular, with whom I worked very closely during the Open Working Group and the negotiation of the 2030 Agenda. But today we have, to start off, Ms. Kekashan Basu, who is the founder of Green Hope Foundation, which focuses on clean energy for educational institutions for SDG 4. And also, she's a sustainability specialist at the Zenda Group, which focuses on the indoor environment and climate. We will then have Olga Skaridina, who is Science Policy Thematic Facilitator for the Children and Youth Major Group of UNEP, and a PhD student at Northeastern University, followed by Jamie Cummings, who is a policy analyst for Woodwell Climate Research, where she works to translate climate data into actionable policy at all levels. And she also supports the UN Office of Disaster Risk Reduction with their stakeholder engagement mechanism, followed by Montserrat Colofan Rosas, also a PhD candidate in the Formas-funded project Transformative Partnerships 2030, based at the Institute for Environmental Studies of the Free University of Amsterdam. And it goes on. Second page of panelists, Dr. Nisha Kohli, CEO and co-founder of Corp Stage, an advisory service to corporates on environment, social, and governance issues. Followed by Dr. Prajal Pradhan, an assistant professor at the University of Groningen in the Netherlands, the principal investigator of the Beyond SDG project, funded by the European Research Council. Then Dr. David Horan, who is one of the co-facilitators of the Communities of Practice and a fellow at Stakeholder Forum, as well as assistant professor at Trinity Business School in Dublin. And finally, last but not least, Jan Gustav Strandines, who is co-facilitator of another of the Communities of Practice on nature-based solutions and senior advisor on governance to Stakeholder Forum. So we have a very long group of people to speak, so we have to keep our interventions short. And I'm going to begin with posing a question, and I want to begin with Kekashan with this. We've heard a lot from the speakers so far about integration and its purported importance in accelerating progress on the SDGs, and yet the failure of many governments and other actors to take it seriously and to figure out how to do it. So I'd like to ask you to ponder, what difference does integrated thinking, integrated action make for a sustainable future? Or put differently, if we proceed in our accustomed, siloed, insular ways of addressing problems, how will that make a difference to our world in 2030 and 2050? Is, in short, integration a game changer? So I'd like to start out, Kekashan, you have 2-3 minutes at most to address that. And then I would just proceed in the order I just mentioned, others to come in and address that same issue first, and then we'll move on from there. So Kekashan, please.
David, I'll just jump in very briefly to say our other panelists, if you wouldn't mind activating your cameras.
Oh, absolutely. We want to see the whole panel together. Yeah, everybody together.
The entire panel is here. And of course, activate your microphones as you want to speak. Just one other comment. We're running a bit late. And we do want to have some time towards the end to have questions from the audience. So
yes.
So I would ask maybe, anyone wants to comment, of course, on the questions, but bear in mind, we should consider brevity and giving everybody an opportunity to have a few words. Thank you.
Right. Kakashan, you have the floor, please.
Sure. Thank you very much for the invitation. Excellencies, distinguished guests, colleagues, delighted to be here and to speak on a topic that is very close to my heart. When the SDGs were adopted, I too was part of the intergovernmental negotiations, open working groups as a representative of civil society. And when the SDGs were adopted, I was the youngest out of the 193 young people selected to represent each UN member state at the General Assembly. I was 15. And I clearly remember thinking that this is the perfect opportunity for us to utilize the SDGs as a framework to explore the different intersectionalities and the intersectoral lived realities on the ground, because I had founded Green Hope Foundations 3 years prior to that at the age of 12. And the work that we were doing on the ground, I was like, okay, how do we use these SDGs to address all of these various interconnected challenges on the ground? And so when people started looking at it as, this through the siloed approach, I found that to be very strange, because as a grassroots actor and as someone who works in 28 countries with over 500,000 people with very, very different lived realities, it was just really strange to see that the siloed approach was the way to go for people, because we work in areas harnessing clean energy technology for social good, addressing these various intersectional challenges, whether that is building solar water farms to address climate change induced water insecurities in rural Kiribati and Cambodia to make sure that the people there have access to clean drinking water, or addressing the tremendous psychological stress and reducing the tremendous psychological stress caused by climate change on women and girls, when a lot of them in climate disaster zones don't have safe spaces to come out of their homes in the evening. So building solar street lights in rural Bangladesh, rural Cambodia, rural Liberia, to make sure they have safe spaces to come out of their homes and girls feel safe going to school at dawn. So these are all intersectional challenges that exist, and we cannot adopt a one-size-fits-all solution that is going to address all of this. You need to move away from the silo-based approach to be able to actually understand what is going on at the ground level, and thereafter be able to implement solutions that are intersectional in nature and that actually take into account all of these different intersecting realities. So as a grassroots actor, I would absolutely say that adopting an intersectional approach, an integrated approach, is a game changer. We see that at the ground level. And if we at the ground level can do it, that is something that we definitely advocate for at the highest levels of policy making, so that governments and other institutions understand that adopting this intersectional approach is definitely the way forward to make sure that no one's left behind.
Thanks very much. Great. Olga, you want to comment on what you just heard or expand upon it, please? You have the floor.
Yeah, sure. So I very much agree with the previous speaker on the intersectional approach to the SDGs. And as a representative of the Children and Youth Major Group to UNEP, for example, yesterday we hold the Youth Forum on the Future of the Environment, where we decided that we need to bring into the discussion the topics of the green jobs and green skills, science policy interface, and intergenerational collaboration for their human rights on clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. Because currently these topics are not that much addressed by the Pact for the Future. And we thought that it's the agency of young people to think about the green jobs and how they define the green skills, and what are the gaps in bridging scientific knowledge and policy recommendations. And if to expand further on the SDGs, on the processes that are currently happening in the multilateral scene, we need to recognize the importance of the Global Plastics Treaty that aims to end plastic pollution These negotiations are happening right now. And as CVMG, we engage in negotiations since the resolution was tabled in 2022 by Peru and Rwanda. And to just give a brief example, for example, I was in negotiations in Ottawa, Canada, and brief analysis of participants of the process revealed that about 200 lobbyists for the fossil fuels, petrochemicals, and plastics industries were registered and attended negotiations. And that was like a 37% increase in industry presence compared to the last sessions. And industry representatives, they outnumbered the members of scientists by a factor of 3 to 1, or the representatives of indigenous peoples' caucuses by a factor of 7 to 1. So when we're speaking about the contributions of young people to their multilateral processes and to advancing the SDGs, we need to make sure that young people are actually represented and not outnumbered by lobbyists and corporations. And young people, they advocate strongly for the principle of intergenerational equity that advocates and makes sure that we acknowledge the impact of current actions on the well-being and prosperity of future generations, and advocates that we need to use resources sustainably, adopting policies and practices that protect the environment, promote social justice, and foster economic prosperity. And
Great, thanks. We got to wrap up. Thank you, Olga. That was fantastic. Thank you very much. Let's move now to Jamie. I didn't mention that Jamie also works with the community of practice on just transition pathways. And we're going to pivot now to climate change, where she's an expert. So Jamie, please, you have the floor. 2 to 3 minutes at most.
Thanks, David. And thanks everyone who shared their insights. It's really interesting to hear that we're all kind of behind the SDGs and also for integrating them. So it sounds like we need to be the ones running and in power. So then we'd get it all done, I guess. But no, I just to add on to what folks have been saying about integration, I think a really key way to do this is to see a through line and a thread that connects all the SDGs. So things like these like gender, like climate, that can really touch every SDG. And I think that when we talk about integrating, if we come from a mindset of, what's your passion? For me, it's climate. And how can I see that in everything that I do, in every SDG, in every pathway that we're trying to reach this sustainable future? And I think that that's a way to kind of clearly see a thread that connects all the work that we do. And I also will just say, I think that we should keep in mind that the SDGs were developed, all at the same time. And in that sense, they've come from a place of integration and I feel like as though we've almost forgotten that we didn't intend for them ever to be, worked on in silos and not in an integrated approach. And so I think actually bringing us back to their creation can help us think about how they're all interconnected and how at their inception, they were all meant to be enacted together. So yeah, I think that I'll stop there, but this is a really interesting discussion and I'm excited to hear from other panelists.
Great. Thank you very much, Jamie. And now, Montserrat, you have the floor, please.
Yes, thank you
Can you
so
react to the others? Yeah, thanks.
Yes. Yeah, so thank you so much for the thought-provoking question. So when I heard it, I was thinking, if we think about it a little bit deeply, maybe even a little bit historically, we would realize that every problem that we're dealing with today was once a great solution to another problem. And so like few examples would be, for example, plastic was once a solution to replace materials used in manufacturing, such as ivory, elephant horns, turtle shells, etc. Or if we pump tons of fertilizer on the soil, then we may hit some targets in terms of reducing world hunger. But what will that do to like the soil and biodiversity? And like that, we can come up with on endless examples. But in a nutshell, what I want to say is that I think we are surrounded by these trade-offs, and every time that we as humanity try to solve a problem and don't look beyond that problem, the solution is likely to have externalities that will affect other systems. And therefore, I don't think that integration is, let's say, a game changer, but rather, if we don't fool ourselves, it's actually the only way we can follow to continue playing the game without leading towards collapse. And so maybe, yeah, I'll leave it at that to not take too much space. But I think it's not necessarily a matter of prioritization, but about expanding the scope of the system.
Great, thank you very much. Great. Nisha Kohli, please, you have the floor. React as you speak to the others as well if you can.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I'm honored to be here. So I want to bring in some perspective from the corporate environment, and because I do consulting in that space. So in 2010, integrated reporting framework was introduced, which basically required companies to or voluntarily required companies to report on different capitals, like multi-capital analysis. So in capitals, companies have financial capital, assets, human capital, and various, natural capital, intellectual capital, and so on. So all these 6 capitals were, reported under IIRC framework. Then came 2015, where SDGs were introduced, and 2020 OECD came up with a report where they integrated into this multi-capital with SDGs, and that report basically came out with a reporting framework where integration of SDGs happened. So what I want to add on to this is that when we look at those 6 capitals are internal stakeholders as well as external stakeholders. So businesses have to integrate their strategies, their internal strategies with their external strategies together with different communities, with different types of stakeholders. So as Kakishan, you spoke about, and Olga, you spoke about, how the communities or how young people should be, or the civil society should be considered in decision-making. I totally agree with that integration of sustainable development goals cannot happen without interaction with society, without interaction with communities. And when corporates consider that they are the, 90% of the backbone of the society, which are responsible for changing the consumer behavior, if they take the charge, then the country should be able to integrate the results of those corporates in terms of sustainable development goals. Yes, that's what I want to say.
Great. Fantastic. Okay, Praja, I'm going to pivot a little and ask you about this question that comes out of your article with colleagues in Science, where you talk about the 4 governance reforms needed to accelerate progress on the 2030 agenda. And one of those is dynamization, which has to do with how you deal with the changing realities going forward, and how should the agenda adjust post 2030. I'd like you to think about that in light of what Dr. David Donahue had to say about how the whole agenda came to be, and others have said about keeping it more or less as it is. What do you do in taking on board new issues like AI and so on? What's your view of dynamization and how it would work in practice?
Yeah, thank you, David. Before we move to post 2030, so I would like to reflect first on the SDGs, because the road towards 2030 goes via, or post 2030 goes via achieving the SDGs, or achieving as much of SDGs. And even before that, if we need to go 50, 60 years back, we are talking about sustainability discourse, this integrated nature of sustainability, not now, not in 2015. We are discussing already this in 1972 in Stockholm. And the question is like, even though there is a 50 years long international discourse on this topic, multilateral negotiation on this topic, why we are not in a sustainable world. And one of the reasons is like we are talking about interactions, we are talking about integrated nature, but we are not operationalizing that principle. Yeah, we are not talking enough about trade-offs. There are always trade-offs, and these trade-offs are not visible now in the pack for the future. Yeah, before this meeting, I was looking at pack of the future trade-off. SDG trade-off was not mentioned at all. Trade-off word is appear only once in the current 4th version of pack of future. I'm one of the researchers, yeah, among others, who provided comment on pack of the future not taken. Yeah, so we have to think a bit on that. Now, so our silos approach without considering synergies and trade-off is a big problem. We need to, until and unless we consider these issues, we will not solve it. Yeah, and we do have a proposal. Like we have vision on how to address these how to operationalize this integrated nature of sustainable development. We have to think about synergies and trade-off in a holistic way. There are available models, yes, sustainable development models to reflect that, and there are also process to build tools to look at those things. Yeah, and then the next comes is beyond 2030, yeah, or beyond SDGs, what we are heading for. There was this discussion of 2050 as a timeline. Why 2050? Yeah, I'm questioning that. Is 15 years period is too much now? Yeah, we need to talk about 20-year period. Now there was a 15-year period for MDGs. There are 15-year period for SDGs. Why 20-year period for post 2030 agenda? Yeah, we need to reflect that a bit more. Yeah, and then it's not about extending SDGs. It's about making the SDGs more science-based, more ambitious when we go for the post-2030 agenda. And there comes the nature of dynamic nature of development. Yeah. For example, like there is this NDCs, National Determined Contribution for climate action. Yeah. SDGs could be dynamic enough to reflect the changes that's going on. Yeah, where countries could be more and more ambitious across time. Yeah, and this is one of the reform that we propose in this paper published in Science last year. Yeah, which is going quite viral at this point of the moment, because it's also timely input for the Science Summit of the Future.
Great, thank you. Okay, that's very interesting and provocative. So now we have to get Dr. Horan on board to react to your suggestions and to the other panelists. David, please.
Thank you, David. I won't take too long because I notice we're running short.
Yeah.
I would just say that integration is a game changer. I think, as Jamie said, the Open Working Group is a prime example of it. We ended up with a balanced set of goals that are accounted for the 3 dimensions of sustainable development. I think, as Olga was saying, we lack capacities to bring about that type of integration when we're dealing with, issues of implementation now, and these new and emerging issues that are coming. What I would say is that up to 2030, we, governments, companies, academics, even NGOs, we all need to realize that our challenges are getting increasingly complex. Here is an agenda that's actually we haven't really realized its potential. We haven't applied it correctly, I would say, and come up with. And I think Jan Gustav says we need a new narrative around how we use the agenda and how we tackle issues based on it. So I think there's ample room up to 2030 to take more seriously the complexity dimension of the challenges we face, and using the SDGs as a framework. And post 2030, just last point, we definitely should not throw out the agenda, but there clearly are new and emerging issues that we have to deal with, and I think Summit gets at some of those and brings in new things around futures thinking that are increasingly going to be part of sustainability. So
Okay, thanks. That's great. Thank you very much. And now our last panelist, it looks like, will be Jan Gustav. So Jan Gustav, you have the pleasure of rounding off this discussion. Please.
Thank you, David, for giving me such an easy task. I could easily say that I agree with most of what has been said so far, both by the introductions and also by the panelists. I think there is no question that we all agree and we need the intersectionality, we need the synergies, and we need to promote this. And I think this is one of the key elements of the project that we have developed, the community of practice. We're trying to do a number of things in a positive way. We want to take up the challenge which has been given us by earlier participants in webinars we've had to change what we are seeing now into a positive narrative. It's been pointed out very clearly here that there is a lack of progress. But if you look at the charts that have been presented by the SG, there is about 10-15% progress on lots of the SDGs. Lots of them are not making that headwinds, but only 30% are really, really falling way back. So we have actually accomplished something like 70%, not at the ambitious level that we want to, but we are progressing slowly. And I think Donnie pointed to that, and I think also other people have pointed on that. The first introduction was made an interesting point that we also have insufficient knowledge. It's not only insufficient knowledge we have, I think we have lots of knowledge, but how that penetrates into the implementation, for instance, of the 2030 agenda is one of the challenges we have. We are well to remember that the 2030 agenda stands on the shoulders of previous efforts and is the result of more than 75 years of global collaboration. And it's the accumulated knowledge that allows us to see further than ever before. Just take the point that I am dealing with in the COP, it's nature-based solutions. It was first mentioned in the Stockholm Conference back in 1972. And it was in 2022 that it was adopted by the UN as an integrated part of the SDG, underlying the implementation. So nature is important, we know that, but it's integrated politically only a couple of years ago, despite the fact that we've known the necessity of integrating this, and good synergies are only coming if that's a fact. One last point, and that is we need to speak to the ambitions we have, or we at least express, and we don't do much about. I read through the iterations of the Pact for the Future, and one thing that strikes me, it has a lot of empty spaces, but one thing that strikes me is the lack of ambition and lack of hope. And how can we speak about the Pact of the Future when there's no really emphasis on hope and ambition? The 2030 agenda has both of those things, and we still want to implement it. And it's a different world today, yes, but we still believe in the hope and the ambitions and the aspirations of the 2030 agenda. All the panelists have pointed to the necessity of integrate these things, and we all agree to that. And then we look at the Pact for the Future, where most of this is lost, I think. And we are on the brink. I hope there is a miracle tomorrow, but we're on the brink of acknowledging a pact for the past and not for the future. But I think this we're doing is exactly trying to do something about the future.
Great, thank you. That's very helpful, because I wanted to kind of wrap up. We need to soon, but we want to get some questions from the participants online. But before doing that, I want to go back to Kekashan and draw upon something you just said, Jan Gustav, about the contrast between the optimism and ambition of the 2030 agenda and the apparent lack of ambition and vision of the Pact for the Future. And Kekashan gave a talk in 2018 to the One Young World Summit, where she talked about talking with young people, children even, about the environment and the depth and breadth of their concern for the impact of human activities on the environment, and then talking to adults and finding complete indifference to the impact of our lives on the environment. And I was, curious. Okay, so people go through evolution from youth, where they're actually forward-looking and ambitious and responsible, to adults where basically other things take over their lives, and that stuff doesn't matter anymore. We don't care about anything but getting by. And so in a way, we've seen an evolution in the UN system from the ambition of the 2030 agenda to the, well, it's good enough getting by of this pact for the future. So, why? How do we re-energize older people who have to make decisions now about the future, because we can't leave it all to the next generation, let's face it. Okay. And it's the older people who are making the decisions in the UN. So tell me, Kekashan, anybody else want to come in? You're welcome to as well, but start with Kekashan.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I feel like as like 6 years after that speech, I am someone like as I grow older, I feel like I think I'm focusing more and more on the work that I'm doing and definitely not becoming indifferent. And when I was younger, I used to think that, oh, how is it that when they grow older, they get this, apathy and indifference. But as someone who's been working in this field for such a long time, like going from a child to an adult in this field, I feel like a lot of the people that we worked with and a lot of the adults that I work with now, a lot of them didn't have the awareness or the education starting from a young age that kind of instilled the empathy for people and planet in them. And so I feel like my generation and the generations that are like coming up now are having that access to the awareness and to the empathy for people and planet, and understanding that it is something that we definitely need to act on now. And given that we live in a more interconnected world, we're also being more aware of what is going on in different parts of the world and not just staying like within our own bubbles. So I feel like that has definitely contributed to how we look at things, despite the fact that we're all growing older. And that is kind of how we engage adults as well, that and a lot of people from different generations, that there is definitely a lot that can be done, and it is at this point it is still not too late to learn about different issues and still like kind of bring out the empathy within your own spheres of influence to act for people and planet. So I would say that is my response to that, and I feel like that has definitely helped to develop optimism in a lot of people. And we have seen change, even though it is slow. We have seen change, and it's going towards the positive side. So that will be my response.
Okay, great.
Can I chime in, David?
Montserrat? Who's that? Montserrat?
Jamie, that's Jamie.
Jamie. Okay, Jamie. Yeah.
Thanks, David. Yeah, I really want to underscore, Kekashan, what you're saying about education. And I think you were also getting to the empathy piece of emotional education. And I think that's really critical and a large piece of what keeps youth energized and creative these days is an understanding of how to avoid burnout and how to look out for yourself and look out for your community and take the time that you need to, fill up your cup so that you can then spread that with others. And I think that's really critical in this space. And so, yeah, I think that emotional education is something that older generations maybe are not so accepting of. It seems like a soft kind of aspect to young people these days, but I'll just say that I really think that's so critical and the only way that a lot of us can continue to do the work that we do. So thanks.
Great. Did you want to say something, Montserrat? We're going to have to wrap up soon, but no? Okay, I want to we didn't have much time for questions from the floor, but there was one I wanted to just refer to, which is Zakir from the Farmer's Voice of Bangladesh, who talks about the local level, acknowledging the enormous contribution of civil society organizations, which is underplayed, it seems. I'm teaching a course on the SDGs in a university in the United States, and my students are mostly working at the local level in local government, in local companies, and so on. And I asked them a question based on an article by Bierman, Frank Bierman and company, about the SDGs and the evaluation of what has been their impact. And they conclude, oh, it's just been sort of discursive impact. People talk about it, but they don't really do anything about it. And my students, I asked them this question, is that what your experience suggests? And they said, not at all. At the local level, a lot is happening on the SDGs. And it's not necessarily that we're proceeding at the rate that we should be, but there's a lot of innovation happening, a lot of awareness, and a lot of integration of SDG thinking, even SDG references into local plans, sustainability plans. It's becoming commonplace. And this is in Florida, which is not a state that is known for its progressivity on most issues these days. So there is basis for optimism, and we have to remember that there are these voluntary local reviews, which have been championed by many cities, except in Ireland, apparently, according to someone who told me last night that Ireland is falling behind in this regard, and hopefully that'll change. But many cities around the world are doing this, and I think that this should be encouraged, because my experience historically in my research has been that national policies, national action happens from the accumulation and pressures from the local level on national governments to change. When many localities are facing similar problems and dealing with them, but need to have a leadership from the national level, that's when things change. And so maybe that's what we should be, well, encouraging more of. I won't say it's the only way to move forward, but it certainly seems to be one important element. Okay, I'm finished. I'm wrapping up here. Anybody want to make a final observation before we turn to our last speaker, who is the head of the Stakeholder Forum, Irena Zubcevic?
Well, actually, David, Irena isn't able to join us for final comments.
Okay.
I'll just we do have a couple of minutes left that we could take a question or two. Now, have any of the panelists here been looking at the questions, and is there one in particular you would like to address? If so, please feel free to do so. Montserrat, you're shaking your head. Do you want to say something? David, why don't you put your hand up?
Sorry, I'm waving a good bit in the background. Rose Alani's put down, how do we get people to change their attitudes?
Change what?
To change their attitudes.
Okay.
And because, we all work in the SDGs, we all recognize linkages, but it's out in the, it's in the public now. There's awareness that, the social issues, environmental issues matter. But, decisions are still being made in silos. And I just want to point out that one thing is deliberation. In Ireland, in the Citizens' Assembly, simply getting people to talk on common issues or shared challenges is a way of shifting people's worldviews. And I think that's something we need to bring more into the SDG implementation, rather than it's this government department who is doing this.
That's great. Yeah, citizens' assemblies, a fascinating idea. They're called different things in different places, I think. Sure. But nevertheless, Ireland has been leading in this area. And Jan Gustav, I think you wanted to come in and add something here.
Very quickly, as we all say. I think what both Kekoshan said and Jamie said, the challenge of changing your minds around empathy, I think that's happening slowly. I mean, I am reasonably old and been around for a while working on these issues, and I'm still very optimistic because I can see the results coming from our common endeavors. And one of the biggest contributions of the United Nations system is to develop a global normative and value-based system. And if you look at also the SDGs, nothing has penetrated the intergovernmental systems to such a large degree as the SDGs. Back in 2015, people would say, this is not going to amount to anything. And here we are. You can go anywhere in the world and you can see and talk to people about the SDGs. And I think also the point made from the farmer in Bangladesh, sorry about not remembering your name, that the local initiatives have taken inspirations from lots of input. And I would just, laud the fact that Kekoshan was only 12 years old when she got interested in this, but she's been moving mountains, as have all the younger generations. I'll be around for a number of years more, even though I'm old, but I'll keep my optimism very young. Thank you.
Great. I see that your hand is up, Prajal. I don't know if we had any time for last comments, 1-minute comments from Nisha and Prajal. Prajal, I'll let you, and Olga too. I don't think Olga has made a final comment. So let's have 1 minute each for these folks.
Yeah, thank you, David. I saw a comment from Livian in the question box here regarding SDG 4. 5 and 6. Yeah, so and then there was also IPCC mentioned here. Yeah, and that's why I pick up this this comment. What we are doing now is like we are looking at IPCC AR5 and AR6 report and try to understand how they are reflecting on SDGs, yeah, at the target level, all 17 SDGs, 169 SDG target, yeah. And one of our finding there is that that in this report in AR5 and also in AR7, AR6 report, there is SDGs are not represented holistically. Yeah, for example, there are SDGs for certain SDGs like 4, 5, 3, which are somewhat underrepresented. Now, and in that context, what we are arguing is that across different initiatives, there are different initiative, intergovernmental initiative, for example, IPCC, IP-based. Yeah, one of our argument is like there should be a holistic representation of various SDGs at a target level. Yeah, not only saying like SDG 1, 2, 3, but looking at target 1.1, 1.1, 2, and so on, so that we can understand whatever action we are taking up in different initiatives. Yeah, what does that mean for all the SDGs, where we can find synergies, where we can find trade-offs, yeah, and how our action can be motivated in a way that we can maximize synergies and tackle trade-off. Yeah.
Okay,
and
good.
then,
Thanks.
Thank you.
We got to cut you off there. Sorry, Nisha, please. And then I think Montserrat also. You haven't said anything finally. So okay, Nisha, and then Olga and Montserrat.
Yeah, thank you. I agree with Professor Prajwal that, some of the SDGs have been more focused and some are not. Yes, that's the reality. But I want to put one point here is that, when I started the journey with sustainability and ESG reporting, I've seen that ESG reporting has gained more prominence because of the regulations that have been introduced lately. So the focus on the regulations have actually shifted the dynamics here with more focus on climate change related SDGs, for example, SDG 13 or SDG affordable energy like SDG 7. But other SDGs have been left out by corporates and other part of the society because of the lack of regulations, or I should say lack of incentivization. So what we need more here is incentivizing those SDGs which are not being achieved or which are lagging behind.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you. Olga.
Yeah, I just want to underscore the importance of collective optimism and hope. We often hear that we are losing trust in multilateralism and that we are hearing that we do not progress that much on the SDGs. However, we need to acknowledge that all the local and grassroots levels, whatever they are doing, their commitments and their passion, and this collective optimism and hope can bring us forward.
Wonderful. Good penultimate intervention. Now for the ultimate intervention, Montserrat.
Yes, thank you so much. And for my ultimate, last remark, I wanted to take a comment by Louis Mollman from the Q&A as a starting point. He says, integration, we have a great SDG indicator 17.14.1 on policy coherence for sustainable development in place. That is a mechanism for integration, synergies, and trade-offs already. And so in my research, I study SDG 17 at great depth because we focus on the implementation of SDGs through multi-stakeholder partnerships. And we see this as such a wonderful mechanism, which so much potential to indeed bring together issues, stakeholders, geographies, levels, etc. But the problem we observe is that that's not quite happening right now. From the data that we gathered, we see only a few declared to focus on SDGs simultaneously, like various SDGs simultaneously. And from those, we see even less that actually tackle them as a nexus and not that they have different projects in their practice that target them separately. Therefore, if I had to give a single recommendation to close, it would be that any actor involved, but specifically multi-stakeholder partnerships, should make sure to develop systems thinking capacities. And post-2030, hopefully, whether we keep them or we redesign them from scratch, I would just love to see a more explicit recognition that we're not dealing with dozens of different problems that need a solution, but rather that we're dealing with dozens of undesired symptoms that have the same root causes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. And so now I think, Charles, we're going to turn it over to you to wrap up.
Thank you very much, David. In particular,
thank you to all the panelists, by the way. You were wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, in particular, David, for your moderation. I think what I'll do is I'll apologize to our audience for the fact that we haven't been able to take live questions. We are just a little over our time, but what I will do is we will save the chat and the Q&A. I'll share that with our panelists, and if there's something there that our panelists feel they have time to respond to, there should be contact details of the attendees on those questions and in the chat. So with that, I think it really is best to begin to conclude the event. I'm going to just bring up a shared screen one more time because I would like to emphasize how important it is for us at the Integrate SDGs initiative to hear from the civil society, all stakeholders, major groups and others. Our goal, of course, is to create, to strengthen the communities of practice that we've developed by having stakeholders participate in that. But in closing, let me just begin to say thanks to all those who have joined us today from around the world. Special thanks to our guests. I see that Minister from the Dominican Republic is still with us. Thank you for sticking with us the entire time, Minister. And there's also a huge thanks to our panel. It's great that we have such a variety of people, variety of ages. I think what we might want to be doing next time we do this is endeavor to even get some younger participants. And I'm sure we can do that in cooperation with our friends at the United Nations Environment Program. So with that, a huge thanks for UN Environment in New York, co-sponsors the Dominican Republic, Norway, and United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs, and a special big thanks to the Integrate SDGs team for conceptualizing and delivering this side event. As mentioned earlier, the recording will be available. A link will come from the Zoom platform to everyone who's registered. Even those who didn't participate today will get a link. And also you'll receive another email from us, from the Integrate SDGs team, inviting you to engage with the initiative as we continue to build the work of the Integrate SDGs communities of practice. You'll see on your screen the address. I put it in the chat box as well. So with that, we are out of time. I'll thank you all very much for taking part. And to say thank you very much from the team here in New York, from around the world. Thank you for joining us and stay safe. We'll see you next time.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks all who participated for your participation.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.